Utah can win the Pac-12. We all know that. Can they win the Big 12? Welcome to the Voice of College Football. We break down the game we all love each and every day with you. Best discussion, debate, and analysis right here. All right, we continue our series looking at schools that are rumored to go to other conferences through realignment and how they have fared against those conferences and how our projection looks in terms of their success going forward in said conference. Utah to the Big 12. Let's take a look. After playing a slew of games against the Big 12 in recent years, Utah did not face this conference in 2022, but in 21, getting off to a rough start, Utah eventually won the Pac-12, of course, their first of two back-to-back championships in the Pac-12. They lost to BYU, a 10-3 team, 26-17. Of course, BYU has yet to play a game in the Big 12. They're a member going forward, but not in the results that we're looking at. So some people have conjectured and said, hey, Mark, why are you considering BYU, Houston, Cincinnati, and UCF in these results? Well, we're looking forward. We're looking at past results to get a gauge on what could happen going forward. So we want to see, in this case, what Utah has done against current Big 12 members. Therefore, we're not looking at Utah's games against the likes of Texas and Oklahoma. Of course, they just played the Longhorns a couple years ago in the 2019 Alamo Bowl. Not looking at that game. So we continue on with the Utes against the Big 12, a win against BYU in 2019, and in 2018 against two Cougar teams that finished at 7-6, a win over a marginal BYU team, marginal to be kind, at 4-9. West Virginia was the opponent in the Heart of Dallas Bowl, the defunct Heart of Dallas Bowl, 30-14 Utes in that one. More games against BYU, and the Utes usually win these games. They certainly did here in the 2000s as they went on a long run against the Big 12. Count them up, about 10 or 12 consecutive wins against the Big 12. And again, almost all of these games against BYU, except we see in 2010 a huge, enormous win against Iowa State pre-Matt Campbell. So now we see a transition of Utah pre-Pac-12, and they had conference games against TCU. So we're going to see now a lot of BYU and TCU against Utah, and we see Utah winning most of the games, but still TCU was awfully good in 2010 as they won the Rose Bowl that year and defeated Utah 47-7. And 2009 TCU awfully good at 12-1, won 55-28. Prior to the 2005 matchup against an 11-1 Horned Frog team, it was more games exclusively against BYU. So we will put this in context, so don't worry. We know that there aren't many games against the Big 12 other than a lot against BYU and a few against TCU. So we've got a volume of games here, 28, but really not much information, because it's mostly against BYU and it's against a pre-Big 12 TCU program that was a really good program that dominated in the group of five, especially during the end of Gary Patterson's tenure in the group of five before they transitioned to the Big 12. But for a school that has 28 games against a particular conference since 2000, not a real good sample size in terms of the variety of opponents. So when you add it all up, it's 28 games at 19-9 against the Big 12, 2-0 in bowl matchups, 4-8 against ranked teams. So this is interesting to note because Utah did run up against ranked top 25 teams 12 times, and despite the overall record being good, they went 15-1 against non-ranked teams, 4-8 against ranked teams. Point differential, Utah in good shape at plus 146 over the course of 28 games, or about 5 points per game. And we see that these teams that Utah has faced in the Big 12, and again, most of these are not Big 12 teams. Most of these in the past are BYU as an independent or in a shared conference situation with Utah. And these Big 12 teams are exactly 2-to-1 ratio of wins to losses at 238 and 119, and Utah's been roughly the same. So they have faced like competition in terms of record, and consider that Utah has played in the Pac-12 for the last 10 years, so these matchups against BYU have come against an independent that some would consider a power of five and some would consider a group of five. Both are valid points. So the record with Utah and the Big 12 teams that they've faced being almost even, it's pretty impressive that the Utes are 19-9. During Utah's stay in the Pac-12, they're 96-53. They are 60-44 in conference play. Now, in the Mountain West prior to that, from 2000 on, the Utes were successful at 96-42, 58-25. And again, the Utes, along with TCU and Boise State for the first decade of the 2000s, of course, the poster children for challenging the Power Five and succeeding many times. And of course, the crown jewel of that was the 2009 Sugar Bowl after the 2008 season, in which Utah upset a 12-1 Alabama team. But yeah, success in the Mountain West. And after a bit of a transition period in the Pac-12, success in the Pac-12 in the past 2 conference championships, in the past 3 out of 4 conference championship games. During this time, Utah has finished in the top 10 3 times. They finished in the top 25 10 times since the year 2000. And Kyle Whittingham, despite losing some recent bowl games in the Rose Bowl, most notably against Ohio State and Penn State, Utah faring well under Whittingham in postseason competition at 13-5. They've won a couple Pac-12 championships, of course, in the last 2 seasons. Before that, no Pac-12 championships. And in the Mountain West, 3 conference championships. As mentioned, Utah was one of the stalwarts of Group of 5 football when they played in the Mountain West, along with TCU and Boise State. And then they transitioned into the Pac-12. They stumbled for a couple seasons, gained their footing, increased the recruiting, developed the program, built the depth, and have challenged heavily in the Pac-12, have been one of the better teams and programs in the Pac-12 since then, and have reached the pinnacle the last 2 years. If Utah would transition to the Big 12, if this does happen, which I don't believe it will, but if Utah is one of those schools that defects because the Pac-12 just can't pony up the money through a media rights deal, Utah is going to be a major factor in the Big 12. There's no question about that. This Utah program is poised for success. Now, Kyle Whittingham's been around for 20-plus years. How long is he going to stay, and how key is he to the success of Utah? Well, he's been integral to that, but has he set up the program for success down the line, and will they hire somebody that can continue that Utah push as one of the top 10 or 15 or 20 programs in all of college football? Utah would compete for championships in the Big 12. There is no Clemson, Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama there to dominate the conference. Again, as we've mentioned, this Big 12 going forward is going to be awfully fun, but there's no dominant program to face the elites in college football. But from top to bottom, fun football, competitive, and Utah would be right there with Oklahoma State, Baylor, and others possibly vying for conference championships. Our thought about Utah going to the Big 12 and competing. Your thoughts below. We want to hear your comments and make your requests as we continue our series matching up schools that are rumored to go to other conferences and how they would match up based on the past and their trajectory forward right here at the Voice of College Football.